Russell and Gordon Soley with Dave Brown right along ringside. We're ready to go with another big day. I like it right from my very opening match, Gordon. Ooh.
Hello again, everybody. Lance Russell and Dave Brown right along ringside. We're ready to go, by golly, with another big day of championship wrestling, David.
Boy, I tell you, we're going to start it off today with Dutch Mantell in here.
Hello again, everybody. Lance Russell and Dave Brown right along ringside. And by golly, we're ready to go with another big championship wrestling. But there is something special, and we'll get to that in just a minute, Dave. What we got coming up?
All right. First of all, let me tell you who's going to be here.
Hello again, everybody. Lance Russell and Dave Brown, and we're right along ringside, ready to go with another big championship wrestling. Good morning, David.
Boy, good morning. I tell you what, we have got quite a day coming up here today. A couple of tag team matches.
Number one, Russell! Number one! Well, I tell you, if it is, it'll be the first one you've had around. At least you got... Being a little more of a gentleman than you are, it saves me from saying what I would like to do with those records and earphones. We'll take time out and be back.
Hi, this is Lance Russell, and in just a moment, we'll be running to ringside by golly to pick up the action on a lot of matches that we've got lined up for this championship wrestling.
When you get an opportunity to see Jerry the King Lawler and Bill Superstar Dundee together, it can't be bad right from the opening gun. And we're going to have that very often.
Oh, yeah! By golly, I hear that theme, and I get kind of all ginned up
ready
here.
to go.
I know exactly what we got, and Dave's going to tell you about it.
We're going to have Buddy Landell in here in the opening match today. The Nature Boy will be here.
You know, I got thinking, Davey, that this is almost like opening Christmas presents. You never know what you're going to get. Hello again, everybody. We're ready to open up another champ.
Oh, my goodness, what a group we got here today. Hello again, everybody.
The exact truth. One of the hesitations I had of coming back here was the fact that I knew I was going to have to listen to that mouth that hadn't gotten any smaller.
Yeah, tell that to all those rednecks out there because I know better, but it is good to see that nose again.
I will come back. Tell me that
Mr.
you are
Russell,
crazy enough.
Mr. Russell, I have a lot of money. I make
Keep running your jaw and you'll have worse than you got right now.
Shut up, Russell.
Okay, Andy Kaufman, the loser in the match with Jerry the King Lawler.
Where is Lawler? I told you that the didn't have enough guts to come on down here. I said that the man has everybody on his side.
We would like to use this if it takes place later on, so please watch your language, will you? Because for crying out loud, we can't use a thing with you swearing like that.
I don't give
What a night, huh? Wow! I gotta tell you. Do you know how long we waited? Yeah, you know, because most of you have been right there with us all the way waiting. And I want to tell you one thing, for the Jared Promotions, thank you very much for your support. I'm delighted you were here, and I hope that you feel like that you were, because finally, after a 15-year quest, son of a gun, it happened. We have a homegrown champion right now. Let's have it for the King and the new World Heavyweight Champion, Jerry Lawler.
It's been 14 long years that I've waited to hear that man right there call me the world heavyweight champion. I don't know about you, it sounds good to me. Thank you.
Hello again, everybody. Lance Russell and Dave Brown. We're right along ringside, about ready to go with another big day of championship wrestling, David.
We're going to open with a brand new team in here, Paul Diamond and Michael Lee. It'll be our first look at them on championship.
Well, here we are for A Dinner with the King, episode number 29. It's titled Thank You, Lance Russell. And I'm Glenn Moore, joined here by WWE Hall of Famer Jerry the King Lawler. And before we get into the show, I know you don't hear the barbecue sounds. You don't hear the forks clanging or the people walking around in the background. It's because we're not at the barbecue restaurant today. We wanted to devote this episode to Lance Russell. And a lot of people maybe listen to the podcast that know Jerry for popping in on the pre-show and also the Attitude Era Jerry the King Lawler. But there's a whole history of Jerry the King Lawler decades before you knew him in the Attitude Era or even know him to this day. And when you listen to those clips and you go on YouTube and you watch Jerry the King Lawler from his time at Memphis, for Memphis Wrestling, I'm 99% sure that you are going to be hearing the voice of the man that we're going to be talking about today, and that is Lance Russell. And King, I know, usually we start off with some jokes to start the show before we get into our topics for the show, but I wish we had a lighter subject to talk about. But I wanted to do a Lance Russell episode so bad. I wanted to have Lance to come on, and I know that's not possible now, but I think we can do a pretty darn good job remembering Lance in this episode this week.
Yeah, I think so as well. And I like you, Glenn, I kick myself for not asking Lance sooner. You just said this is episode number 29, and Lance would have been more than happy to be on any of our previous episodes. And, he's just a great guy, would never turn down an opportunity to get in front of a microphone or a camera or anything like that. But, yeah, Lance Russell passed away this past Sunday. I take it back. Lance passed away this past Tuesday here in Memphis, Tennessee, where he'd lived most of his life and most of his career here on Memphis, Tennessee. After he retired, he moved down to Pensacola, Florida, but he was back in town, and the circumstances with Lance and his passing really have made this a extra tough week because, as you can imagine, over the years Lauren and I have become great friends with not only Lance, but with Lance's entire family, his son Shane, his son Rusty, and his daughter Valerie. And, I basically, they're a little bit younger than me, but I watched them all grow up, being around Lance and everything so much. And about a year ago, Lance's daughter Valerie found out that she had cancer. And she battled it for this entire year, and just about a month ago, she really took a turn for the worse and got very ill. And so then Lance, I guess, he had come up and he would come up from Florida on at least a monthly basis and visit with Valerie and his son Rusty, and Shane, of course, lived in Florida with Lance. They would come up and visit Valerie, and I don't think that Lance ever Valerie didn't allow him or didn't let him realize, really how sick she was. So then this past week when Valerie was really getting bad, they sent for Lance. Shane brought Lance up and just the oddest circumstances. It was on this past Sunday morning. Lance was up and staying at his son Rusty's house. Lance got up in the morning and fell in the bathroom and broke his hip and broke a bone in his neck in that fall. And so they took Lance to the hospital, and he was in a tremendous amount of pain. And so they pretty much had to get rid of the pain. They put him on morphine pretty strong and it basically just kind of knocked Lance out. But that's how much pain he was in from that fall. And then like about 2 hours after Lance fell and was admitted to the hospital, his daughter Valerie passed away. And so, we talk about that with Lance's son Shane and Rusty, and it's almost like it was sort of almost like a blessing in disguise in the fact that I don't know if Lance could have coped with or handled the fact of, seeing his daughter pass away and at Lance's funeral, or Valerie's funeral yesterday, the preacher even said that, it was almost like God's way of sparing Lance that grief. But at the same time, then yesterday, Tuesday morning early, about 3 a.m., I got the word from from Lance's son Shane that Lance passed away at 3 a.m. in the morning, and he never really regained consciousness from that fall and from them keeping him sedated. And then, of course, Lance passed away yesterday morning, and then yesterday at 6 p.m. was his daughter Valerie's funeral. So both, Lance fell on the day that and was put in a hospital on the day that Valerie died, and then Lance died on the same day as his daughter's funeral. And so it's been a really, really tough week. And what we're going to talk about today is how much Lance meant to not only me, but Memphis wrestling and this entire wrestling world, and especially the Memphis community and all that. I mean, the guy was just he was an amazing person.
I've seen a lot of tweets from a lot of, well, obviously fans of Memphis wrestling, but also a lot of people who see your tweets and also see some notable people in professional wrestling, tweet out their respects to Lance Russell, and they're Googling who Lance Russell is, and watching some clips and being introduced to Lance Russell for the first time. But my assessment of Lance Russell and watching your matches and hearing him call the matches and watching some classic shows on YouTube is that, at least in my assessment, Jerry, he is the Vince Scully of professional wrestling broadcasting. He had that calm voice that can make there's a lot of craziness that happened in Memphis wrestling, Jerry. You know that.
Without a doubt. To
let the viewer know that everything's going to be all right, or just his voice is something that I could Jerry, you lived in Cleveland for a little bit, and you're a Browns and Indians fan, and I know Joe Tate and Herb
Yes.
Score, guys that I used to fall asleep listening to the games, as a little kid. Lance had that voice to where you could, know everything's going to be okay because Lance Russell's is telling you. He had that trustworthiness, and so it's. I know a lot of people are learning of Lance Russell for the first time, and this is why I wanted to do the podcast in general, was to talk about certain people in your life, Jerry, that really affected you. And I know you said it time and time again. I know you'll say it again. Is without Lance Russell, there is no Jerry the King Lawler.
Oh, without a doubt. And I like you said, I realize our podcast is listened to literally all over the world. And so there are a lot of people maybe listening today that have never really heard of Lance Russell. They don't know that Lance Russell was, such an important part in not only my career, but my entire life, and how important he was to Memphis wrestling. But that's the case. I mean, Lance Russell was our play-by-play commentator in Memphis wrestling, going back all the way. Before I was way before I was involved. I think Lance said that he started doing wrestling in like 1957.
Wow.
And did it all the way through past 1997. So for 40 plus years, Lance Russell was our play-by-play guy on Memphis wrestling, and all of the wrestlers that came through Memphis. Lance called their matches, and for me at least, and I don't think there's anybody else that he was this influential in getting their career started. But for me, Lance Russell was solely responsible for me getting introduced into wrestling. I was a high school kid, Treadwell High School, graduate here in Memphis, Tennessee, and my dad and I were big wrestling fans, especially my dad. So our live wrestling was on every Saturday morning, the TV show every Saturday morning that Lance Russell and Dave Brown were the hosts of, and we would watch it religiously. And then on Monday nights at that time, it was at the Ellis Auditorium. This was a couple years before it moved to the Mid-South Coliseum, but it was at the auditorium downtown. We would have a live event, a live wrestling show every Monday night. And so my dad and I would go to those shows, and then, of course, we'd watch the Saturday morning show with Lance and Dave. And I was, maybe 17, 18 at the time, and I was basically had my mind set on being a commercial artist. I graduated from Treadwell High School. I won a full tuition commercial arts scholarship to the University of Memphis. So I was going to Memphis at that time. It was called Memphis State University on an art scholarship, and my my intention at the time, I was going to be a graphic artist, or what I really wanted to wind up doing was being an artist for like DC Comics or Marvel Comics or somewhere drawing Superman or Batman in the comic books. And so it was just a natural extension that I've spent most of my time drawing superheroes. And to me at the time, the wrestlers were like superheroes. Jackie Fargo, Tojo Yamamoto, Don and Al Green, the interns, all of these guys were like, when you saw them on TV, that they were huge stars, and these big guys, big muscles. It was like real life superheroes. So I started drawing some pictures of the wrestlers in my spare time, and I remember one Monday I took some of the drawings that I did of the wrestlers down to the auditorium, and showed them to the other fans, and they were all excited. They said, "Man, those are great." Somebody said, "You ought to send some of those into the TV studio." And so I thought, well, there's an idea. I wasn't expecting anything, but I gathered up 6 or 7 of my drawings the next day and put them in an envelope, and I just wrote Lance Russell, because he was the only person I knew, knew of to send them to at the wrestling show. So I wrote Lance Russell, WHBQ Television, 485 South Highland, Memphis, Tennessee, and I put that envelope in the mail, and I don't even know why or what I wasn't really expecting anything, just maybe hoping that they would show the pictures on TV or something. But the following Saturday morning, I turned on the TV show, and as usual, there's Lance and Dave at the desk, and Lance in his classic voice, and what he said every morning. He didn't say hello. He almost, it was like he said yellow, everybody. Lance Russell and Dave Brown along ringside, it was this typical thing. But when he came on the air, there's Lance and Dave sitting there, and I saw on the corner of their desk was my pictures, my artwork. And my heart just dropped. I just thought, oh my gosh, they're going to show my pictures. I remember I ran and told my mom, come here. I think they're going to show my pictures on TV. And sure enough, about halfway through the show, Lance says, well, Dave, we've got some artwork sent in by a young fan. He picked my pictures up, looked on the back. He said, young fan, Jerry Lawler has drawn some pictures here. Here, look at there. Here's one of Jackie Fargo and Tojo Yamamoto. And so he showed 3 or 4 of my pictures, and I was like over the moon. I thought, this is the greatest thing that ever happened in my life. But that paled in comparison to when the TV show was over, and I'm sitting there in like the afterglow of, man, my pictures was on TV. All of a sudden, my telephone rang. I answered the phone, and there once again was that incredible voice. Yellow, this is Lance Russell. Is Jerry Lawler there? And I almost fainted. And I said, yes, sir, this is Jerry Lawler. And he said, well, Jerry, everybody really loved your artwork today. And he said, what I was wondering was if you could send us some more pictures next week, which we'd like to show them again next week. And so, all of a sudden, here's Lance Russell asking me to do some work for him for the TV wrestling that I've been a huge fan of all these years. So what became of that in the next few weeks, I would send them some drawings. And I became you seem like a courtroom reporter, where they won't allow cameras in the courtroom.
Right.
And somebody will draw sketches of what the defendants and the prosecutors look like and everything. Well, at that time, the wrestling company didn't have enough money to send like a camera crew down to the live events to shoot any footage or highlights. So what they asked me to do was draw some sketches that sort of, showed what happened in the match. Like if Tojo Yamamoto had beaten Jackie Fargo, I remember one distinctly that and then when Lance and Dave came on and started talking about it, they would show, since they didn't have any footage, they would show one of my drawings. And I remember one of Tojo jumping in the air and doing this karate chop on top of Jackie Fargo's head, and Jackie Fargo was just like splitting in half like a piece of cordwood, And so I became like a ringside artist instead of a courtroom artist for the wrestling show. And after about, 5 or 6 weeks of sending the pictures in, Lance called me up again and said, hey, Jerry, we'd like for you to come over and actually be on the show. People want to see, what this young guy that's doing these pictures looks like. And he says, plus Jackie Fargo has a proposition for you. And man, here was my chance to actually go to the TV studio, meet Lance Russell, meet Jackie Fargo, and at that time I got to meet all the other wrestlers, And Jackie Fargo, who was the biggest wrestling star in Memphis at the time, he was so big, sort of like me in Memphis now with my club down on Beale Street. Jackie Fargo owned a nightclub along with Eddie Bond, a country music star. They owned a nightclub on Madison Avenue in Memphis. And Jackie said, "Hey, kid, me and Eddie Bond got this nightclub, Southern Frontier, over here. I was wondering if you want to come over and paint some pictures of me and Eddie Bond on the wall." So I was just thoroughly thrilled. I wound up, getting to go to Jackie Fargo's place. I wound up painting. I bet I painted 100 different caricatures of scenes of him and Eddie Bond all throughout the club of them. And one thing led to another. That's how I got introduced to Jackie Fargo. And instead of this story lasting as long as my career did, I became friends with Jackie, friends with Lance, and the whole wrestling community. I got a job working at the radio station that Eddie Bond worked at, who was partners with Jackie Fargo, and Jackie had a radio show on there that gave me one to another, and that's how I got my foot in the door and how I got involved with professional wrestling. And it was all because of Lance Russell took my drawings and showed them on television and then picked up the phone and called me up afterwards. If it hadn't have been for Lance taking that interest in a totally unknown kid, I would have never been in the wrestling business whatsoever.
And I almost feel, your career, just spanning decades and where you're at right now, it's hard to imagine that was, wrestling isn't what your life calling was. But it's amazing to think that if Lance Russell didn't show those photos on that show or called you, that I could be talking to Jerry the King Lawler, DC comic, famous artist, instead of the famous wrestler.
Yeah, I mean it's a good possibility, because that's definitely what was my plans, was doing something involving art, and of course it was so funny. I think it was September the 8th, I believe. Lance was in town for the last time before he came in town this last time to visit Valerie. Lance was in town. His son Shane called me up. I'll tell you what it was. It was just like right the day before the hurricane hit in Florida. And Shane calls me up and says, "Hey, Lance is in town, and he wanted to know if you'd come over and meet us for lunch at your restaurant, where we usually do, Jerry Lawler's Barbecue Company on Germantown Parkway, where we usually do the show from." And I said, "Oh my gosh, of course." So I took the opportunity, me, I never missing a chance to plug something. I immediately tweeted out that I'm headed over to meet with Lance Russell, and we're going to have some barbecue, and anybody that wants to come and join us, you're welcome to come. And so about an hour later, I got over there, and there was Lance and his son Shane and his son Rusty. And I'm telling you, Lance was just in the best mood, the best spirits, and he ordered a big old barbecue sandwich and just loved it. And fans were coming in, and Lance was always one of those guys. He was modest, but he really, he sort of secretly really enjoyed the attention. He loved that he had fans. And I guess sometimes it kind of surprised him at how many fans he did have, because I think he always felt like the wrestlers were the stars of the show, and he was just there to make them seem like they were the stars. But Lance really over the years became as big a star as anybody of any of the wrestlers. And so he had a lot of fans that came by the restaurant, took pictures with him, and I took some there that day. So it was just that recent that Lance was in great spirits and visited us out at the barbecue company.
Jerry, before we get into talking more about Lance, and I don't want to plug this at the end of the show, can you let everybody know when the service will be in Memphis for Lance Russell?
Well, ironically, I spoke to Shane about this, and to me, it couldn't be more fitting. It couldn't be more perfect. Lance's funeral is going to be at Memphis Memorial Park, which is right across the street, right across Poplar Avenue from Memphis Funeral Home. It's the funeral home inside Memorial Park, the cemetery. It's going to be at Memphis Memorial Park Saturday morning at 11 a.m. And that was, of course, for all of those years, that was the start time of Memphis wrestling. Saturday morning at 11 a.m., everybody tuned in to see Lance Russell and all the Memphis wrestling stars. And so it couldn't be a more fitting time. This Saturday morning at 11 a.m., and then Shane asked me, he said, hey, would it be all right? And he said, this is just an idea that I had. And he said, my dad loved coming down to your place on Beale Street. And matter of fact, the last time he was down there, we had he and Dave down there for an induction ceremony into the Memphis Wrestling Hall of Fame. And he said, Shane asked me, he said, would it be okay if at like 3 o'clock this Saturday after my dad's service at the funeral home, if his entire family and he said, I want to invite everybody that was ever a fan of Lance's to come down to the club on Beale Street and just from 3 to 6, just hang out and celebrate Lance's life. And everybody's going to come down, tell stories. We're going to have some video of Lance and just basically a 3-hour celebration party for Lance. His entire family's going to be there. I'll be there. I'm sure a lot of the Memphis wrestlers will be on hand. And we just want to invite everybody, everybody that was ever a fan. If you were ever watched Lance Russell and you were a fan, it's this Saturday, 3 o'clock, at Jerry Lawler's Hall of Fame Bar and Grill on Beale Street. It'll be open to the public, and Lance's service is as well. It's not a closed service. If you want to attend that at Memorial Park Saturday morning at 11, you're more than welcome. So that's the service that's planned. He's actually going to be Lance is actually going to be buried, he and his wife, at a national cemetery in Pensacola, Florida. Lance was in the service as a young man, and they're going to both be in a national cemetery down in Pensacola.
And we'll post this information on our Dinner with King Twitter account in case people who don't write it down, or in case. So I'll post it on the Twitter account if people listening want to see it and be able to hopefully attend if you're in the Memphis area. Jerry, I've been watching a ton of clips of Lance and also yourself. You guys have had a lot of segments together. There's this one video, and I'm sure we're gonna, I'm gonna add some clips of these, audio of these clips throughout the show. But there's one of you pranking a doctor.
Oh my goodness! That was not supposed to get out anywhere. That's one of the things that escaped and will live forever on YouTube. But Lance was, Lance was just a great guy and was always enjoyed, joking around with the wrestlers and that sort of thing. But there's one from our old doctor friend in Evansville, Indiana. We used to have a doctor on hand to do a physical for all the wrestlers right before the matches. And this poor old guy, he was way past his prime, and I don't even know if he could see the numbers on the blood pressure thing or not. But we would kind of pull some pranks on him almost on a weekly basis. But he was a good-hearted guy, and Lance helped us out with one. And are you gonna play the soundtrack of that one?
Yeah, and thank God I don't show video because people don't need to see you pulling your pants down.
Yeah, I basically asked the doctor to perform what was it? One of those I don't know where
check for hemorrhoids.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, it was a funny scene.
And a lot of the backdrops in a lot of these guys have hemorrhoids, and so really I've heard that it's a tough way, and I assume probably
the doc sticks his finger up our ass and checks us for hemorrhoids.
Come on,
before the matches.
No. Well, I don't worry about the hemorrhoids.
I don't worry about really. No, I'm not kidding you.
Hey, come on, Jerry.
This
is a family show. We're gonna have to cut it. Yeah, that's all.
Get out of here.
Yeah,
it's very nice.
That's right.
Thank you. Pleasure, and thank you very much.
Come on, he's got it.
Hey, come on, Jerry. That's enough. We're not gonna have it.
But anyway, the great thing about Lance was the fact that what you saw on TV, you hear the old expression, what you see is what you get. Well, what you saw on TV was the real Lance Russell. And I think that's what made him so successful. And I tried to, once I got into broadcasting in the WWE, I tried to emulate Lance in that sense. I always, when I watched or listened to Lance Russell and Dave Brown, it reminded me of just not two guys that are on TV. It reminded me of two guys that were just like two best friends sitting on a sofa watching a wrestling show and talking to each other.
Yeah.
And that always, that is something that I think the fans out there watching always related to. They felt like Lance Russell was a friend of the family or a part of the family that came into their house every Saturday morning at 11 o'clock and stayed for an hour and a half and visited with them. And that's what was so special about Lance. And once I got, when JR and I were together, I always kind of kept that in the back of my mind. I didn't ever want to, I didn't want to try to necessarily be out of character. I just wanted to, it was like JR and I were sitting there watching a wrestling show and talking to each other. I wasn't like that we were performing for the audience. And that was the same way with Lance. He was never, even though the audience was his, primary focus, it wasn't that Lance was going out of his way to perform for the audience. He was just being himself and just such a genuine guy. And I think that was one of the reasons he and Dave Brown both had so much credibility. It's hard to talk about use the word credibility with a wrestling show. Yeah. But Lance and Dave were able, through their personalities and the way they talked and the way they did a broadcast, to make everything that the people were watching believable. I mean, it was just, we were always kind of conscious of keeping both Lance and especially Dave, because Dave Brown was the top weatherman his entire career from the day he started doing, he was a top meteorologist and the top weatherman on every station that he worked at, primarily Channel 5, where we had our wrestling show, and before that, Channel 13, where we had our wrestling show. But Dave was the top weatherman, so we had to go, we had to be extra careful to preserve Dave's credibility, because you didn't want people to say, oh, the weather guy, he's the same guy that does that crazy wrestling, who's going to believe what he says? So, and Lance and Dave were both the same way. That's why we didn't really involve Lance or Dave so much in the action as sometimes you would see, things happen with the announcers and things in the WWE. But if that did ever occur, it was a very special deal, a rare event. And it just, whenever Lance got touched by a wrestler, or whenever when he got emotional about something, people knew, hey, this is something out of the ordinary. This is something special. One time, I think Jimmy Hart busted a 5-pound bag of flour in the studio and it went all over Lance. And this was almost something people had never seen before. And it had such a huge impact because it involved Lance.
Do you know how much is in this bag right here?
I know how
it's
much
enough to cover a whole bunch of. It's a lot of flour in here. It's enough to cover a lot of people.
You quit crying about it. If they get a hold of it and they use it, I have an idea who they may want to use it.
That's right. Oh, that's good. See, you want to make fun of me because you want to see them jumping on me, don't you, Russell?
All I can tell you.
How do you like it on you? You look crazy.
All right, Hart.
You look crazy.
Get out! All right, Hart, you're out of here. You're out of here. You are suspended. You better believe I can. I'll tell you one thing. I'm not going to put up with you around here anymore. Hart, you're suspended. Get out of here. Lynn, will you get that stupid fool out of here?
It also had a huge impact because we got in big trouble with the TV station. We didn't realize at the time that when those bags of flour broke, all of that flour dust was in the air. And the cooling fans on the big cameras, the TV cameras back then, sucked that flour right into the cameras, and it almost shut all the cameras down. I mean, they had to do a major repair and clean job on the cameras, and we were told by the general manager, do not bust any more bags of flour in the wrestling show. So, but I mean, I remember one time Dream Machine grabbed Lance, and one time, one of my favorites was when Tojo had grabbed Lance, and Lance got a hammer and brought a hammer out on the set, and Lance cut a promo up to Tojo Yamamoto saying, I have no doubts that Tojo Yamamoto could kill me if he wants to, but I'm going to tell you what, I'm not going to let him treat me that way. And he said, I may only get one lick in with this hammer. He said, but Tojo, I promise you, I'll hit you right in the face with this. I mean, and people, when Lance got involved, when Lance, as sincere and believable as he was, when that happened, that was a huge, major deal.
Yeah. Did he, a question, I put a tweet out, people want to ask questions or share stories about Lance Russell. Because of that aspect, you wanted to keep, kind of separate and make it a big deal when it did happen. Did Lance want to get involved here and there? Did he enjoy getting involved? And this is a question from Twitter. Did he enjoy getting involved, physically, or did he shy away from that at all?
No, Lance never shied away from it, and I think he did enjoy getting involved. A couple of times we had him. Well, one of the times I can remember, a couple of times he went so far as to be a special referee in a match. One time in a match between me and the Mongolian Stomper, who was this big, mean, bald-headed guy that had been built up as a world beater. And I mean, he was really a scary guy. And Lance wound up being the special referee. And when the match was over, I can't remember all the details of it, but for one reason or other, the Mongolian Stomper was really irate. And he came in the back and was slamming doors and throwing things and screaming and cussing and ranting and raving. And I was in the same little dressing room with Lance, and Lance's eyes got real big, and he said, "What's he mad at?" And I listened out the door, and I said, "Ooh, Lance, I think he's mad at you." And Lance said, "Lock the door, lock the door." So I think that was the last time that he wanted to referee a match. But yeah, he did. But he was always, he would always be cautious and remind us of the fact that we didn't want to do anything that would take credibility away from Lance, because he and Dave were the magic combination that I think had helped to make the fans in Memphis, and I can honestly say this, I believe the fans in Memphis believed in our wrestling more so than any other wrestling company around the country. And I credit Lance and Dave for that.
There is another clip of when this is back in 1984, and it is when Eddie Gilbert attacked Tommy Rich, and then you see Lance on the screen, going to throw it to a next segment. And then you see the betrayal happen off screen, and Lance's face is just, he's just kind of feeling that pain of Rich. He just, and I think this is missing from wrestling today is, being able to tell a story without saying many words. And I know Lance, his voice is carries on forever, but just his facial expressions on the show when certain things happen. Just put over what was happening, in front of the viewer and also in front of him.
Well, you're right. That doesn't happen anymore, and I think the reason for that is because there aren't any Lance Russells around anymore. Yeah. Lance could sell a move or sell something that was going on merely with a facial expression. In one case in point, people can go, or you may even have the clip, but people can go on YouTube and look it up. Joe LeDuc. I was wrestling Joe LeDuc, and Joe LeDuc came out to do an interview with Lance, and all Lance did was stand there and hold the microphone. But Lance was in the shot the whole time, and Lance's facial expressions and his hand movements, without saying a word, helped make that interview that Joe LeDuc did so powerful. Joe LeDuc, it was the infamous, "I'm going to take an oath." He couldn't say oath. He said, "I'm going to take an oath. People think I'm crazy. I'm not going to show you I'm not so crazy.
I'm going to take an oath. You know what that is? Well, I'm going to tell you what it is. In the lumber camp in Canada, when you do something very important, when you want to do something very important, you take an oath. And you make a scar on your body somewhere to remind you, in case you don't do it, and to remind you not to look at yourself in the mirror. Never! Well, I'm going to do it now, boy. I'm going to show you, punk. This is an axe, and this is an arm. I'm going to show you, punk. I'm going to cut my arm, and if I don't do what I told you Monday night. I'll never be able to look at myself in the mirror as long as I live. But I'm going to do it. Now, Jerry Lawler, you hear this. Jerry Lawler, you hear this. Right now, Jerry Lawler, I'm going to mess up your face. And that's the last match I lost with you, Jerry Lawler. Look like that. All right. You see it right here. Look at it, boy.
And so he takes his arm, and he's got this big lumberjack axe. And he explained that, up in the lumber camps of Canada, if you wanted to remind yourself that something very important you had to do, it was almost like most people would tie a string around their finger. Well, he said in Canada, in the lumberjacks, you would take an oath that you would put a scar on your body. And that scar on your body, when you looked at it every day, would remind you of what it was that the oath that you took or what you wanted to do. So Joe was taking an oath that he was going to destroy me the next time he got within arm's reach of me. And he took that axe and he started sawing on his forearm, on the inside of his forearm with that axe. And he said, I'm going to cut my arm. And Lance's face is just like Lance is cringing, and because you could see Lance is looking down at Joe's arm, and Lance did such an amazing job without saying a word on that promo. That's just the kind of things that Lance was capable of doing. He was just that genuine, and he was just that. It was a natural is what it was, because I want to say it was a talent, but I don't know if that's the right word. I think it was just Lance being Lance. He was just naturally that great at what he did.
When we talked about the Undertaker in Memphis, I forget which episode that is, but I played you a clip, and when the Undertaker is the Master of Pain did his first promo, and it's not the best promo, but you hear Lance go, and you just, it's just those little things.
Because the Undertaker or Mark had just told people that he was had been in prison for killing a couple of guys in a parking lot somewhere, and now he's out on parole, and so that was his story of where he had been, why anybody hadn't heard of him before now, and so right when the Undertaker or Mark or Master of Pain explained his background, Lance was a little skeptical. It was like perfect, because hey, today if somebody comes on Monday Night Raw and says, hey, I just got out of prison. I've been in federal prison down in Atlanta. A couple of guys are pushing up daisies right now. Hey, immediately people could go on YouTube or they could Google or whatever, and they could find out that's a BS story, right?
Right.
And even if you didn't take the time to do that, if somebody came on now and said that on Raw, everybody would say, yeah, that's BS, but whatever. But Lance, back in the day, with his credibility, like you said, that little that was just enough of Lance casting his form of doubt on that story, but letting the story go. It's like, well, I'm going to take that story with a grain of salt, and maybe you people should too. But he didn't doubt the guy, and he didn't doubt the story, so it made it credible, and that was just the way Lance was.
There has been plenty of articles written in the past 24 hours, a lot of editorials on Lance Russell. There's a great Deadspin article from David Bickenspan, who wrote about Lance Russell and calling him the greatest pro wrestling announcer of all time. And even WWE.com wrote a nice little write-up about Lance Russell on the website. A couple questions when it comes to Lance Russell and WWE, WWF. Was there ever a time that WWE, WWF fans could have heard Lance Russell on their programs? Was there ever a time that Vince wanted Lance Russell, or did you try to vouch for Lance when you went to WWF at all?
Well, no, because at that time Lance was already doing the stuff with WCW. Okay. So when I first went up there, and so I didn't think Lance had any desire to be there. And then one of the clips, as you're talking about the last couple of days, been looking back on things. Lauren pulled up a clip my memory, is not that great, as you well know, but I'd forgotten. But not too long ago, I had the privilege of bringing Lance out during I don't know if it was SmackDown or Monday Night Raw that we had live in Memphis at the FedEx Forum, and I got to bring Lance out during the show and introduce him to everybody there, and he got to come up through the gorilla position and meet and have his picture made with Vince McMahon, and that was one of the highlights of Lance's life, and it was a great thrill for all the fans there to get to see. It was the first time a lot of them had seen Lance in years, in person, and so that was a great thrill, and I've had tons of people ask me, what do you think about Lance being in the Hall of Fame? And I think he's certainly deserving. I mean, even though he didn't ever work for the WWE, hey, WWE is putting a lot of people in the Hall of Fame that didn't necessarily work for them, which I think is a great thing. It's even though it's called the WWE Hall of Fame, it is with where they're kind of opening their arms a little further. It's more of just a wrestling Hall of Fame now, and I think that's a great thing. And so I'm hoping that one of these days Lance will certainly be inducted as what some of the people said. I think he's, at least in my eyes, the greatest wrestling commentator ever.
Jerry, if that happens, you would have to be introducing yourself as a inductor for Lance Russell. I'm sure you would be the man inducting Lance Russell into the Hall of Fame. There's no other person I can think of that would be for the right man for that job.
Well, that would be a great honor. It's similar honor. Last year, Lance asked me if I would come to Las Vegas, and the Cauliflower Alley Club inducted Lance into their Hall of Fame. Which if a lot of people aren't familiar with what the Cauliflower Alley Club is, but it's a group of former wrestlers and announcers and wrestling people that they have a big meeting every year in Las Vegas, and they have a Hall of Fame induction ceremony, and I watched the clip of that of me introducing Lance, and it was so great because so many famous commentators were there at the time. JBL, who was the voice of Monday Night Raw then at the time, Mean Gene Okerlund was there, Bobby the Brain Heenan was there, good old JR was there, and then I got to introduce Lance, who was being inducted into the Announcers Hall of Fame there last year. And it was so great. Lance got up on stage and said, "Yellow, everybody, thank you." And all of a sudden he reaches in his pocket and he pulls out this big long piece of paper and he starts looking at it and he said, "Oh, no, don't worry. That's not my speech. That's just a list of the pills I have to take today." Oh. so he had a great, still always had a great sense of humor and was just an awesome guy. But yeah, that was a great honor to get to introduce and induct Lance into that Hall of Fame. And if it happens at the WWE Hall of Fame, I would be so honored to get to induct Lance.
He was very well, watching all these clips on YouTube, he was very well versed when it comes to one-liners, just as you are, Jerry. But being able to hold his own when he was, sparring verbally with, other wrestlers, managers, and one person that comes to mind is Jim Cornette, a very, very young Jim Cornette, as the mom, the rich mom, him, being the guy coming out and whining a lot, and Lance being able to drop some, classic one-liners, and also, yourself when you were, feuding with Jim Cornette, and to tell you, Jerry, Jim Cornette is going to be on the podcast in 2 weeks. So
with us, we're here
with us.
Really?
Yeah, he's going to come on.
Oh my gosh, awesome!
So Jim is going to be on part of the podcast in a couple weeks. But yeah, just being able to, Jim got his start, and Lance, carried some of the first interviews. Raven also a notable, guy there in the Attitude Era for WCW and WWF. But a ton of guys, and people can watch one clip, Jerry, of Lance Russell. I know this is a hard question, but
I know where you're going, and I don't know.
There's a ton. But, I mean, if there was one definitive Lance Russell moment that people can get properly introduced to Lance Russell, which clip or segment would it be in your eyes?
Oh, man.
I'll tell you one clip that maybe won't define – it won't define Lance Russell's career, but it made me laugh that I discovered the past 24 hours. And I'll let you think about my question, but I'll explain to people, and I'll play the clip here. Is when it was a Christmas special, and Lance had one wish.
Oh yeah, of course.
It reversed roles, and here is you, Jerry Lawler, with the banana nose and the glasses, and I never see Jerry Lawler with a tie, and this is one of the few instances that you had a tie on. Being Lance Russell, then you had Lance Russell with the Army helmet on.
I do, in fact, have one wish, and if I could have one wish that would come true, I know exactly.
Thank you very much there, Davey. We're going to be back in just a little bit with some more
All right,
really good...
Banana Nose, hold it up here now. I got something I want to say to you.
Wait a minute,
Put that
Lawler.
microphone over here. Now, wait a minute. Don't give me any of that stuff, Banana Nose. I want that microphone over here because I got something to say.
Well, wait a minute,
All
Lawler.
you people have been... Now, listen. I have listened to you tell these lies about me and all of these things, and I'm not going to stand for it.
Well, that was what you wanted to do, reverse the roles. Well, it's finally happened.
Still do, yeah, reverse. That's right.
That was
I didn't have to put those tights on for this, though.
Yeah, you look pretty neat in those tights. That was back when I had Lawler's Army, so you had on the helmet there and the tights, and you should have sued those legs for non-support, Lance. I'll tell you.
Go ahead.
Those are your trunks, I assume.
Yeah, and that was actually Lance's suit too. I mean, we just sort of came up with that idea on the spur of the moment, and so we really exchanged clothes. And as you can see, the suit is like so small for me, and then the tights with my, the strap is on Lance. And when what you're talking about was when people ask me one of my fondest memories of Lance and things that we did, that was always at the top of the list, where Lance and I switched roles, so to speak, and he was there berating me, and I'm trying to conduct an interview, and I had a big plastic nose on, and that nickname that I gave Lance did have a prominent proboscis, in other words, a big nose, and so and when I think back on it, I think that I may have been one of the first guys, and I don't even know why or what started it, but I think that I may have been one of the first guys in wrestling, in Memphis wrestling at least, that zeroed in on Lance and made him part of my interview. I think before that, when Lance had been just basically, when he interviewed guys like Don and Al Green and a lot of the different old school wrestlers, they looked at the announcers just the guy that was going to be there to introduce them and hold the microphone for them while they talked. And they may tell them to shut up or something like that. But I think I was the first guy to come along and really zero in on Lance and start, throwing out some one-liners and insults to Lance. And I think, that was one of the big things that got me over, because Lance was so loved and so well liked by all the fans. And then for this young guy to come along and start insulting Lance, that was just something they hadn't seen before. And it just really ticked everybody off. I mean, Lance used to do commercials for a company called Baxter Suits. And every week he wore a Baxter, beautiful, nice Baxter suit on the show. And a couple of times during the show, he'd do commercials for him. And, so I made fun of his Baxter suits, and, with the clothes. I said one week Lance wasn't there, and I said, yeah, he had to attend a funeral. One of his Baxter suits shined itself to death. And so it's just, just little things like that. And I'll never forget one time I ripped his coat pocket off of one of his Baxter suits. And then I talked about his nose. And one week I said, well, Lance was a little late getting here today. As Lance was crossing the bridge, coming across the Mississippi River, he happened to stick his head out the window, and the wind caught his nose and turned the car around. And next thing you know, he was headed toward Arkansas. So just things like that, and then and so I started calling him Banana Nose, and somehow that nickname stuck, and still to this day people call him Old Banana Nose. Even when I first had my first restaurant, Slam Burgers. One of the hamburger was called a Slam Burger, and we had a banana nose hot dog on the menu, and it said what it was a foot-long hot dog, and we call it a banana nose because it's a foot long, like Lance's nose. And so, and just a little side note, I think we are going to actually this Saturday down at the club, we're going to have on hand, we're going to have some banana nose hot dogs for all the fans that come in and celebrate with us, just in honor of Lance. But like I said, I was the first guy that kind of made Lance a part of the interviews and the skits and with the insults, and then it went from there, of course, to Cornette insulting Jimmy Hart. Jimmy Hart even cut a record called Lance Russell's Nose.
Actually, down a new artist. A lot of people calling. The phones are lighting up this morning for the new record from Jimmy Hart. It's called Lance Russell's Nose.
I was listening to my radio late last night when I heard a knock on my door. I went to the window and I peeked outside. It was a girl about 5'4". She said she saw my name on a bathroom wall, so she thought she'd give me a try. So I locked the door and I invited her in, but when I turned on the light, she had Lance Russell's nose. She had Lance Russell's nose. Little rocky smile that drives me wild, and Lance Russell's nose. She had Brooke Shields hair. You should have been there. Boy, was I surprised. Oh, Gary Hill and Mick Jagger lips and Michael Jackson's eyes. Dolly Parton's chest. You know that's the best. And old Herschel Walker's eyes. I was doing all right till she turned on the light. It was then I realized she had Lance Russell's nose. She had Lance Russell's nose. Little rocky smile that drives me wild, and Lance Russell's nose.
And I did the she had Lance Russell's nose, and it was about a girl that was very pretty, except she had this big huge nose. So the nose jokes stuck all throughout Lance's entire career.
The clip that I added in the montage, the opening introduction montage, was Hart, bringing us a #1 hit, and then Lance goes, "Yeah, if that's true, it's the only #1 hit you had to be the first one you had." But it was great at the quips. Have you thought about the clip, Jerry? Have you thought about what the definitive segment of Lance Russell that people can be introduced to him? Have you thought about that yet?
Oh, I don't know. It's so difficult. I mean, there, so many things that we did. Lance left the studio one day and came over to my house on Walnut Grove Road during the show, and found me supposedly passed out drunk in my front yard, and just Lance's expressions and the things he said during that interview. Of course, I wasn't. I've never drank it. Everybody knows that.
What in the Sam Hill are you doing out here with all this drinking and carrying on?
Sit down,
Jerry, no, listen. Good night. This is awful. I have never seen you in a situation like this.
Lance, have never drank nothing.
Yeah, right.
Nothing till 3 days ago.
Come on, Jerry, you've been
And now?
They want me to come out and find out what in the Sam Hill. Come on.
I'll tell you what in the Sam Hill. Who is he?
Come on, Jerry. Good night.
You want to know why I'm here, Lance? Where am I?
Please, yeah. All right.
I want to tell you why. Because I'm going to quit. I'm not wrestling anymore.
You're not going to quit.
I have already quit.
You're just, come on now. Let's get in the house.
I don't feel so good.
I bet you don't.
But I was trying to lull Bill Dundee into a rematch. So I was pretending to have, quit the business and become a hopeless drunk because I couldn't get this rematch, right? And Lance came over and conducted the greatest interview with a supposed inebriated king that I've ever heard. But then one of my other favorites, though, is he had an altercation with Tojo Yamamoto, and Lance had to wind up going and getting a hammer and threatening Tojo with this hammer. That's another great clip that everybody needs to see of Lance. Oh my gosh! And then another time with Dream Machine, we did a thing where we poured molasses or syrup all over. We called it tar and feather, but we poured molasses or syrup all over somebody, and then bust a feather pillow on them, and then the next thing you know, they're completely covered with syrup and feathers. And we did that to Dream Machine one day, and Lance was trying to interview him after that, and I think Dream Machine grabbed Lance. That was another classic clip that you would need to see of Lance. But gosh, I mean, the guy was on our show every week for 25 years. So it's hard to pick out any one certain point that you could single out as his best.
Here's a question from Paul on Twitter. He wants to know, what is your favorite Lance Russell line?
I think with the most thing that you would have to hear Lance saying it seemed like at least once a show, he would say, can we get some help out here? Eddie Marlin, can we get some help out here? Can we get somebody out here? That was what Lance would whenever things would break down and get out of control, which was all the time, that was the first thing Lance would say. What in the Sam Hill is going, can we get some help out here? Eddie Marlin, can you get us some help? I think that's my favorite line, other than when the show opened every week, he would say, yellow, everybody. He wouldn't say hello, he'd say yellow.
There is 2 years ago when I came down to Memphis and watched you and Funk go at the Ullman Arena, that was a tribute show to Lance Russell, and Lance was there with Dave Brown, and we all know about the empty arena match, and
talking about the empty arena, there's a great clip that you could watch of Lance, because you really see when that thing starts. It was almost like a little behind the scenes thing. It wasn't even supposed to be being taped at that time. Lance is actually smoking a cigarette
inside the arena.
Inside the arena, and he starts talking to Terry Funk, and it was almost like, this shouldn't be on the air. This is not part of the show yet. Lawler hadn't even arrived yet, and so his banter back and forth with Terry Funk on that particular episode was a real classic as well.
That's also in the montage to open the show, and him, Terry Funk is swearing up a storm. This is going to be on TV, and Lance goes, if you keep swearing like that, we can't use this. We can't use this video. Right. And then Terry goes, I don't give a. Just great. And there's a lot of people have been tweeting at us. Obviously, you too, Jerry. A lot of people have been tweeting their Lance Russell stories. And Lance Russell was active on Twitter and Facebook, especially Facebook, posting some videos, especially down in Florida, and also making his way to Jackson for that show a couple years ago. Right. So he was embracing social media, even at, in his early 90s. Still,
at 91 years old. That was one of the things that and Lance knew, and of course his two sons knew, and Valerie, that Lance was he was 91, and he was starting to get I don't know if the early stages of Alzheimer's or maybe just a little bit of dementia, but he had trouble with some long and short-term memory lapses at times, but at times he was perfect. So that was just the way Lance was. Back on September the 8th when he was at the restaurant, I put him on the spot, and I was sitting there with his two sons, and I said, Lance, how old are you now? And all of a sudden, when I said that, both Lance, Rusty, and Shane both kind of leaned in like, all right, Dad, there's the question. What's your answer? Because I guess sometimes Lance couldn't remember, how old he was. And he said, what do you think? I can't remember how old I am? I'm 91, and I'll be 92 in March of next year. And they both said, whoa, hey. They both start giving him a little round of applause, But yeah, Lance was 91, and his son Shane lived down there with him in Florida, and Shane got him into, as you said, Facebook and Twitter especially. He really enjoyed Twitter, as I knew he would. I had told him once before, Lance, you got to get on Twitter, and he really embraced that, and he would tweet out, quite often, and I always loved to retweet. Memphis Lance was his Twitter handle, and I always loved to retweet Lance's stuff. He was great at that.
I want to give this podcast justice, and this is our, official Lance Russell. I'm sure Lance will come up in future shows, Jerry, but, this is our, thank you, Lance Russell episode. Is there anything that maybe you want to add before I give you my final question about Lance Russell before we wrap this up? Is there any stories that you want to share or just anything you want to share with not only Memphis wrestling fans, but even fans that maybe are being introduced to Lance Russell this week.
Well, I've pretty much already told the story of how instrumental Lance was in my career and in my life as well. He's one of those people, at least to me, that you thought was going to be around forever. You can't picture what things are going to be like without a Lance Russell in the world. And so, he's going to be sorely missed. He was a tremendous, I think I've said this on some radio interviews and TV interviews that I've done. I think what Lance's legacy, what he would like legacy to be, more so than being remembered as a wrestling commentator, was what a great family man Lance was, and what a great individual. He had the most wonderful, beautiful family of his two sons, Shane and Rusty, and his daughter Valerie, and their kids, his grandkids, and some of their kids. It's just they just had a tremendous family, and Lance was just the most humble and sincere and likable friend to everybody that he met. He was one of those guys that you can honestly say never met a stranger, and he was quick-witted. He was quick to make a new friend, and just you can't. I'm one of the few people that I can honestly say in the wrestling business that I've never heard anybody say anything negative about Lance Russell. Never heard anybody say a disparaging word about Lance Russell. He's just was a wonderful human being, and just meant so much to me. And there aren't many. I guess I don't know. I say there aren't many. I guess probably everybody that's been successful in their life or their career or whatever can look back and find that one person. There's usually always one person that without that person, they wouldn't be who they are or where they were today. And, in my life, that one person is Lance Russell. And so, I'm going to miss him dearly, like a father. And I don't know, there's just not enough good things you can say about the man.
Final question, King. You actually answered my legacy. I was going to ask you what Lance's legacy was going to be. But when you include Lance Russell in the conversation of, I know Deadspin labels him the greatest pro wrestling announcer of all time. And I know you worked with a lot of them, and they all have their unique style. They're in their unique era. They fit their era when they're considered the greatest of all time. But when it comes to the JRs and the Bobby the Brain Heenans and the Jerry the King Lawlers and the Gorilla Monsoons and the Gordon Solis and all those wrestler commentators that I didn't even mention, where does Lance Russell, in your eyes, rank with all those others I mentioned too?
Well, I'm certainly biased, but when you asked the question, I'm glad you asked it the way you did. In my eyes, Lance is at the top. He's the best. But there are a lot of people I'm sure listening right now saying, "Oh, how can you say that?" And those are people that didn't know Lance or didn't hear Lance. So that's a hard comparison to make, because man, there's been tons of great commentators out there, JR and Bobby the Brain Heenan and Gorilla Monsoon, so many great ones, and I don't mean to leave anybody out, because like I said, there's been so many great ones. But to me, I guess because it was the voice that I grew up on, just like when I go to a Comic-Con or when I go to a wrestling show or whatever, the first thing most people come up to me and say, "Hey, you and JR are the voice of my childhood." So to those people, probably me and JR are the greatest commentators they ever heard, because that's what they grew up with. That's what they were raised on. And to me, in my eyes, I was raised on Lance Russell. I grew up on Lance Russell and worked with Lance Russell. So I knew him not only as a fan, but I knew him as a friend and as a coworker. So Lance, to me, would be the best.
This is like, I know you mentioned, Lance, you got that phone call from Lance and you had that feeling, and I'm not going to be a professional wrestler. I'm not going to be a commentator for Monday Night Raw, Jerry. But I echo that feeling of your idol, which you have been for many years, being able to call you and consider you a friend. So I just want to tell you that myself.
Well, I appreciate it, Glenn, and I know I'm probably like Lance was, when I would sit around, and I've done this before on panels and different things with Lance, telling people that I think Lance is the best right in front of Lance. And he would always say, and he'd take it with a grain of salt and, humility and all that sort of stuff. Because I think that, once again, that goes back to Lance being such a natural at what he did that he almost took it for granted, as I do. I don't think, I swear I mean this, I don't think of my career or what I do as being anything special. It's just me doing what I do. And I think that's what Lance always did. So that's why, he was such a humble guy. And when people would heap praise on him, it was, I think it was embarrassing to him or uncomfortable because he just thought, hey, that's just me being me. But that was what was so great about Lance Russell.
All right. I think that's a good time to wrap it up for this episode, King. I think we did the podcast justice for Lance Russell, and I hope everybody enjoyed the clips that were sprinkled in into the show of Lance's commentary and also segments with the ones we mentioned. I hope everybody goes on YouTube and just Google Lance Russell on YouTube. Just put his name in, and you will be entertained for many, many, many hours.
Yes, you will.
Even if you don't know who Lance Russell is, you will be properly introduced that way. And I'm sure all the fans that have been fans of yourself for many, many years are doing the same, Jerry. So I really hope this, not only for Lance, but for yourself, because I know how close you are to him. I hope this podcast, holds up to the standards of a Lance Russell tribute.
Oh, I am very pleased with the job you did in putting this all together, Glenn. I appreciate it. I know his son Shane listens to the podcast every week. And once again, I want to remind everybody, we're taping this on a Wednesday, and I guess I don't know if it'll start airing Thursday or whatever. But this coming Saturday, what will be the date of this Saturday? October what?
Hey, geez, I want to say that's the 7th.
Okay, October 7th. That's going to be the date. Saturday morning, 11 a.m., Memphis Memorial Park, funeral home, Lance Russell's service. Everybody that's listening to this right now is invited. You're more than welcome to be there. And then 3 o'clock this Saturday afternoon on October the 7th at my club down on Beale Street, Lance's entire family, Shane and Russell and their wives, will both and all be on hand. And we're going to have a 3-hour celebration starting at 3 o'clock. At 3 o'clock, we're going to celebrate Lance's life. And everybody listening to this is invited. Come on down and let's keep Lance's memory alive this Saturday. A lot of times when a loved one or a great close friend passes away, you are left with the feeling that I never really got to say goodbye, or I never really got to tell the person how I felt about them. But I'm happy in the fact that over the years, I did have several opportunities to tell Lance how much I thought of him, how much I loved him, how important he was to me, that without Lance, there would be no me. And I knew that, and I had the opportunity to say that to Lance Russell. I loved Lance Russell, and there'll never be another person like him.
I just wanted to tell you how much fun it is coming back again to talk to you, even with a little nonsense. Hope you enjoy this particular day wherever you may be.
I'll tell you for a fact, and we got more of it coming up next week, though, my friend, so we're going to be looking for you.
We'll see you the next time we're around where they've got ring post and that kind of stuff.
Till we see you at that time, for Dave Brown, Lance Russell saying bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everybody.